long before Christianity spread across the Roman Empire. Long before the birth of Jesus. One story stood at the very heart of the Bible. It is a story of slavery and freedom, of faith and suffering, of miracles and mystery. According to the Bible, an entire people escaped one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world under the leadership of a man named Moses. For thousands of years, this account has shaped the beliefs of Jews and Christians alike. It inspired laws, religious traditions, art, literature, and countless generations of believers. Yet it has also become one of the most debated events in ancient history. Did the Exodus happen as described in the Bible? Can archaeology confirm any part of the story? Or does the evidence tell a more complex story? In this episode, we explore the world of Moses, examine what the biblical account tells us, investigate the archaeological discoveries connected with ancient Egypt, and discover why the Exodus remains one of history's most influential narratives. To understand Moses, we must first return to the end of Joseph's story. According to the book of Genesis, Joseph rose from slavery to become one of the highest officials in Egypt. During a devastating famine, he brought his father Jacob and his extended family from Canaan into Egypt, where they settled in the fertile eastern Nile Delta, in a region known in the Bible as Goshen. Over the generations, Joseph's family grew into a much larger community. The Bible describes them multiplying into a numerous people living within Egypt. But as time passed, the political landscape changed. According to the book of Exodus, a new king came to power in Egypt who no longer recognized Joseph or the service he had once provided to the kingdom. Whether this reflected the rise of a new dynasty, a change in government policy, or simply the passing of many generations remains uncertain. According to the biblical account, the Israelites gradually lost their privileged position and became subject to forced labor under the Egyptian state. They were assigned to major construction projects and endured increasingly harsh treatment. The Bible names two store cities associated with this labor, Pithom and Rameses. These place names would later become an important part of the historical debate surrounding the Exodus. Before we continue, it is important to remember something from our previous episode. Archaeologists have discovered that Semitic-speaking communities lived in Egypt's eastern Nile Delta for centuries. Sites such as ancient Avaris reveal that people from Canaan settled, traded, and worked within Egypt long before the traditional dates proposed for the Exodus. These discoveries provide valuable historical context. However, they do not directly identify the Israelites, Joseph, or Moses. Instead, they show that the biblical setting is consistent with a world in which populations from Canaan were present in Egypt. To better understand this story, we must now look at Egypt itself. During the period many scholars associate with the Exodus, Egypt was one of the greatest powers on earth. The Nile River transformed an otherwise arid land into one of history's richest agricultural civilizations. Its pharaohs ruled over an empire that stretched far beyond the Nile Valley. Magnificent temples honored the gods. Royal tombs displayed extraordinary wealth. Professional armies protected Egypt's borders and projected its power across the ancient Near East. Egyptian officials maintained detailed records of taxation, agriculture, trade, diplomacy, and royal achievements. It was a civilization renowned for its administration, engineering, and monumental architecture. This makes one question especially intriguing. If an event as dramatic as the Exodus truly occurred, why has no Egyptian document clearly described it? This question has fascinated historians for generations. Some argue that the absence of direct Egyptian records casts doubt upon the biblical narrative. Others point out that Egyptian royal inscriptions were designed primarily to celebrate victories, honor the gods, and glorify the pharaoh. Military defeats, internal crises, and national disasters were rarely recorded. For this reason, the absence of evidence cannot by itself prove that an event never happened. The debate continues today. Another major question concerns the date of the Exodus itself. The Bible contains chronological information that has led some scholars to place the Exodus around 1446 BCE, during Egypt's 18th dynasty. This is commonly known as the early date chronology. Other historians favor a later date, placing the Exodus during the 13th century BCE, often during the reign of Ramesses II or shortly afterward. This interpretation is influenced by the biblical reference to the city of Ramesses and by archaeological evidence from Egypt and Canaan. Neither chronology has achieved universal acceptance. Both continue to be studied and debated. Because the evidence remains incomplete, historians have not reached a single conclusion regarding when the Exodus, if historical, may have taken place. Against this backdrop of uncertainty, the Bible introduces one of its most remarkable figures. According to the biblical account, Pharaoh became concerned that the growing Israelite population might one day support Egypt's enemies during war. To reduce this perceived threat, he ordered every newborn Hebrew boy to be killed. One infant, however, survived. His mother hid him for 3 months before placing him inside a carefully prepared basket coated with bitumen and pitch. She placed the basket among the reeds along the edge of the Nile River while the child's sister watched from a distance. According to the book of Exodus, Pharaoh's daughter discovered the child, took pity on him, and adopted him into the royal household. The child became known as Moses. His name has attracted considerable scholarly interest. Some researchers note that the Egyptian element Mos appears in royal names such as Thutmose and Ramesses, where it carries the meaning born of or child of. The biblical text, however, connects the name with Moses being drawn out of the water. Both explanations continue to be discussed by scholars studying the relationship between the biblical account and the Egyptian language. Growing up within Pharaoh's household, Moses occupied a unique position. According to the Bible, he was born among the Hebrews but raised within Egypt's royal environment. If historical, such an upbringing would have exposed him to Egyptian language, administration, religion, military organization, and court life, while still preserving an awareness of his Hebrew origins. This unique background would prepare him for one of history's most extraordinary confrontations. A man raised inside Pharaoh's palace would one day return to stand before Pharaoh himself. Not as a prince seeking power, but as a prophet demanding freedom for an enslaved people. As Moses grew older, he became increasingly aware of the suffering of his own people. According to the biblical account, one day he witnessed an Egyptian overseer brutally beating a Hebrew laborer. Moses intervened, killing the Egyptian and hiding the body in the sand. Believing no one had seen what had happened, he returned the next day. But his actions had already become known. When he tried to settle a dispute between two Hebrews, one of them challenged him, asking who had made him a ruler or judge and whether he intended to kill again. Realizing that Pharaoh would soon learn of the incident, Moses fled Egypt. His escape marked the end of his life as a prince and the beginning of an entirely different journey. He traveled east into the land of Midian, where he would spend many years far from the royal courts of Egypt. In Midian, the man who had once lived in Pharaoh's palace became a shepherd. According to the biblical account, Moses came to the aid of the daughters of Jethro, also called Royal in some passages, a Midianite priest. After helping them at a well, he was welcomed into Jethro's household, married his daughter Zipporah, and began a quiet life tending flocks in the wilderness. For many years, Moses lived far from Egypt. The man who had once been raised in a royal palace now spent his days crossing deserts and mountains, learning the harsh landscape that would later become the setting for one of history's greatest journeys. Meanwhile, the suffering of the Israelites continued. According to the book of Exodus, their cries reached God, who remembered the covenant made generations earlier with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. One day, while tending his flock near Mount Horeb, also called Mount Sinai in other biblical passages, Moses witnessed an extraordinary sight. He saw a bush burning with fire, yet it was not consumed. Curious, he approached to investigate. According to the biblical account, God called to Moses from within the burning bush and instructed him not to come any closer because the ground before him was holy. The exact location of Mount Sinai remains one of the Bible's enduring historical mysteries. Over the centuries, scholars have proposed several mountains in the Sinai Peninsula and northwestern Arabia, but no site has been conclusively identified through archaeological evidence. At the burning bush, Moses received a mission that would change history. According to the Bible, God commanded him to return to Egypt and lead the Israelites out of slavery. Moses hesitated. He questioned whether he was capable of confronting Pharaoh and doubted whether the Israelites would believe him. He also expressed concern about his ability to speak before others. According to the biblical narrative, God assured Moses that he would be with him throughout the mission and appointed Moses' brother Aaron to serve as his spokesman. Together, the two brothers returned to Egypt. The journey itself demanded extraordinary courage. Moses was returning not as a prince reclaiming power, but as a prophet challenging the most powerful ruler in the ancient Near East. The identity of that Pharaoh remains one of the great historical debates. Those who support the early date chronology often associate the Exodus with rulers such as Thutmose III or Amenhotep II. Those who favor the late date commonly suggest Ramesses II or, in some reconstructions, his successor Merneptah. However, no surviving Egyptian inscription identifies a pharaoh in connection with Moses or the Exodus. Because of this, historians continue to debate the question, and no single identification has gained universal acceptance. According to the Bible, Moses and Aaron first gathered the elders of Israel and shared the message they believed they had received from God. The people responded with hope, believing that their long years of suffering might finally be coming to an end. Encouraged by this response, Moses and Aaron appeared before Pharaoh and demanded that the Israelites be allowed to leave Egypt to worship their God in the wilderness. Pharaoh rejected their request. Instead of reducing the Israelites' burden, he increased it. The Bible says the workers were required to produce the same number of bricks as before, but now they had to gather their own straw while still meeting the same quota. As conditions became even harsher, many Israelites blamed Moses, believing that his actions had only increased their suffering. The confrontation had begun. It was no longer simply a dispute over labor. According to the biblical account, it had become a contest between the authority of Pharaoh and the God whom Moses represented. With diplomacy exhausted and Pharaoh refusing to change his decision, the conflict entered its most dramatic stage. Egypt, according to the Bible, was about to experience a series of extraordinary events remembered throughout history as the 10 plagues. According to the book of Exodus, God warned Pharaoh through Moses and Aaron that Egypt would experience a series of judgments unless the Israelites were released. The biblical account describes 10 successive plagues, each increasing in severity. The Nile, the source of Egypt's life, was said to have turned to blood, making its water undrinkable and causing fish to die. This was followed by frogs covering the land, then swarms of gnats or lice, flies, disease among livestock, painful boils, destructive hailstorms, locusts that consumed the remaining crops, and a darkness that covered Egypt for 3 days. The final plague was the most devastating. According to the biblical account, the firstborn in every Egyptian household died during a single night, while the homes of the Israelites were spared. Before this event, the Israelites had been instructed to sacrifice a lamb and mark their doorposts with its blood. Their homes were passed over during the final judgment. This became the origin of the Jewish festival of Passover, which continues to be observed today. For Christians, Passover later gained even deeper significance, as the New Testament draws powerful connections between the Passover sacrifice, the death of Jesus, and the message of redemption. The plagues have fascinated historians and scientists for generations. Some researchers suggest that natural events may explain parts of the sequence. Red algae blooms or heavy sediment may account for water appearing red. Polluted water could have forced frogs onto land, leading to insect infestations. The spread of insects may have contributed to disease among animals and people. Large volcanic eruptions elsewhere in the world have also been proposed as possible causes of unusual weather patterns or prolonged darkness. These explanations remain hypotheses. None has been universally accepted, and none fully explains the complete sequence described in the biblical account. For many believers, the significance of the plagues lies not only in the events themselves but also in their timing and theological meaning. According to the Bible, after the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh finally agreed to release the Israelites. The people departed in haste, carrying unleavened dough before it had time to rise. The Book of Exodus records approximately 600,000 adult men leaving Egypt, in addition to women and children. If understood literally, this would represent a population of well over 2 million people. Many historians question whether such a migration was possible during the Late Bronze Age. Some scholars suggest that the ancient Hebrew word translated as thousand may have referred to clans or military units rather than exact numerical totals. Others continue to defend the traditional interpretation. Like many aspects of the Exodus, this question remains the subject of ongoing scholarly debate. According to the biblical account, the Israelites were led toward the wilderness rather than directly into Canaan. Soon afterward, Pharaoh changed his mind and sent his army in pursuit. The Israelites found themselves trapped between the Egyptian forces and a large body of water. Here we reach one of the most famous moments in biblical history. Most English translations refer to this body of water as the Red Sea. However, the original Hebrew text uses the name Yam Suf, often translated as the Sea of Reeds. This difference has led to centuries of discussion. Some scholars propose shallow lakes or marshlands in the eastern Nile Delta. Others argue for locations farther south, including the Gulf of Suez or even the Gulf of Aqaba. More than a dozen possible crossing sites have been suggested. At present, no location has been confirmed through archaeological evidence, and the exact site remains unknown. According to the biblical account, a powerful east wind blew throughout the night, allowing the Israelites to cross safely before the waters returned, overwhelming the pursuing Egyptian army. Scientists have shown that under certain geographical conditions, strong winds can temporarily expose shallow lake beds. While such studies demonstrate that natural phenomena of this kind are possible, they do not identify the biblical location or confirm exactly what happened during the Exodus. For believers, however, the crossing of the sea remains a defining act of divine deliverance. For generations, the Israelites had known only slavery. Now, according to the biblical account, they stood on the opposite shore as free people. Behind them lay Egypt. Before them stretched an unknown wilderness. Whatever happened at the sea, their journey had only just begun. In the next part, we leave the biblical narrative and examine what archaeology has discovered, what evidence remains debated, and why the Exodus continues to challenge historians more than 3,000 years later.